Welcome, everyone. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And my topic this time is sending email. So, brief overview of what that entails. And essentially, I'm going to talk about a couple ways that you can send email. The easy way, the simple way, is to use the show URL method with the mailto prefix. And this will open whatever the default mail client is on the computer. And the user will actually have to click send. So it's not, completely, automatic, but it does have its uses. And the other way to send email is using SMTP. And that stands for the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And that's actually an internet standard that's been around a really long time, since 1982, actually. But in order to send email using SMTP, you're actually going to need to have an SMTP server that you can connect to. Now, this is often also just called an email server. There's lots and lots of them around. Gmail is a really popular one that most people seem to have an account for, and you can use SMTP with Gmail. And there are lots of other ones as well. And you can, of course, choose what you want. There's free ones. There's ones you have to pay for. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is if you are sending lots of automatic emails from your apps, and I'm talking lots and lots, hundreds a day, thousands a month, that sort of thing, you're not going to be able just to use a general SMTP server like Gmail or something like that. You're probably going to want to sign up with a service that actually is designed for bulk emails so that you don't get flagged as a spammer, so that your account doesn't get frozen for periods of time for sending too many emails. So that's another option depending on what you're doing. But if you're just sending out the occasional email, status updates of your app or error report or something like that, you can certainly use your own SMTP server. So a little bit about using mailto. Well, you just use the show URL method, like I said, and you use the mailto prefix, and then you can just provide the email address like this. And this pops up, like I said before, the user's default mail client, and it'll have a new message window that will appear, and this email address will be filled in the to field. And this can be handy, if you just have, you just want people to, be able to send you feedback or something like that. Having just a quick link that does this can be sufficient. You can also tweak that a little bit. You can actually add a subject to the email automatically. So when it pops up in the new email window, a subject will be pre-filled in, and you can just pass that along with a parameter like this. So here the subject is Xojo. And you can also add some body text by using the body parameter and then putting your text there. Now, obviously, this technique, you're not going to want to do something that's super duper long. Depending on the operating system or other factors, there's probably some sort of limit as to what you can pass along. And the other thing is that you're going to need to make sure that you encode both the subject and the body using encode URL component so that it's properly passed along. So you can see here in the text, the %20 is used for spaces, not just a regular old space. And if you don't do that, again, depending on the system or the mail client or whatnot, you might get your stuff truncated. So this is obviously super simple, but some option to consider. Now, sending email from Xojo is typically, what people want to do using the SMTP socket, or more particularly, the SMTP secure socket. Because most email services these days are actually secure. So the older SMTP socket doesn't have as much use anymore because you're going to need to provide all the appropriate settings so that you can securely connect to the mail server. So SMTP secure socket is the one you're going to want to use. And then to use it, you set the connection properties. You create your email message. You add it to the SMTP socket, and then you tell it to send the email. And it's actually, pretty straightforward. Often the trickiest part is getting the connection properties properly configured for the SMTP server that you're actually using. And there are events on the socket that are called for various things, errors or success, and a few other things that you can check if you want. Now, for the example I'll be showing you in a moment, I'm actually going to be using Gmail. And if you do want to use Gmail, you do have to do a few things to configure it so it will work with SMTP. Because by default, Gmail has SMTP disabled because they actually want you to use their web interface or their custom API rather than the internet SMTP standard. They, as I mentioned here, they just consider it less secure. I suppose it is less secure than a proprietary protocol, but it is a standard protocol, so it's not really less secure. But anyway, you can enable it. You just have to go to the right place on the Gmail site. So you can go to your account and at this URL, and when you do that, it'll bring up, so you just need to be logged into your Gmail, and then you can go to this URL. And then that brings up a page that essentially just has this thing on all by itself on the page, and you can just flip that to be on. And then once you do that, you'll be able to use SMTP with your Gmail account. Now, the same technique that I previously described for connecting to SMTP was actually for a desktop app, but the web is going to use the same process. Although you're probably going to want to use the SMTP socket for the entire web app rather than creating a new one each time, because that could end up with a bunch of connections to your server, to your SMTP server. And again, it's possible the server doesn't like that. So if you use just one connection, you'll probably be better off. You can also, of course, implement a web service that communicates with your SMTP server to send emails. And this can be a good way to hide any server information from the apps that call it. Instead, they just need to go through the web service, which will have its own mechanism. And this is the technique if you want to send emails using SMTP from an iOS app, you have to go through a server. You'll need a web service that, you'll have to go through a web service, I should say. So your iOS app will communicate with the web service. The web service then talks to the SMTP server. All right, so let's take a look at some of these. All right, so here I have a simple desktop app. Very basic, just a window right now. It's got a to field, the subject field, and the message field. And if you look at the code in the send button, well, actually, I will point out the other thing that's on the window. Those are the controls, but also on the window is the actual socket. This is an SMTP secure socket. I just named it mail socket. And I've added the two events here that aren't really going to do anything too useful except display a message box when they're called. So here is the general setup code for sending an email using Gmail. So the Gmail server is smtp.gmail.com. And the port is typically 465. If that doesn't work, you'll probably want to be checking the Gmail docs to see if they have alternate ones that are available depending on your account or whatnot. You'll want to set the connection type to be TLS and the mode SSL TLS. And definitely tell it it's secure, of course. And then you provide your Gmail username and password. And that handles all the connection. And then you can create the email message. That uses the email message class. And then you just set the properties for what you want to send in the email. So you can add recipients. So here, just adding what's in the to field. You can, of course, add multiple recipients. Email can go to multiple people. Setting the subject to what is entered in the subject text field. And the body text, the message, I'm using the plain text here, and I'm just grabbing what's in that message area, text area, to put in there. You can also set up HTML if you wanted to have something fancier, but plain text is fine for this example. And then adding a header can be helpful to identify where the email came from. And probably is a good idea. Make sure your stuff isn't getting unnecessarily flagged by spam filters and the like. Doesn't really matter what the heading is. And then you can add your message to the socket's list of messages and then send it. So we got an event that said the mail was sent. We can see on my phone that the message just came through that we sent. So that's the overall process for sending an email. Let's take a look at how that might apply to a web app. So you can see here I have a web app set up with a page similar to how that window was, with just a few fields for the email information. But the send button doesn't actually have all the code in it here. It's calling another method and passing along the stuff from the page. And that is actually calling the send mail method here that's on the app class, because what I'm doing in this web app is when it starts up, I am initializing a few things. I'm creating a semaphore to make sure that the SMTP sockets just use once at a time. And I'm creating a new socket, and then I'm mapping a couple of its events to some methods. And the send mail method, however, looks very similar to the code that was on the desktop apps button. It does the same sort of thing here. The only real difference is at the beginning, it's just signaling the semaphore to see if it's available for use. And then at the end, it's setting a property for the session so that the error event handlers here will be able to display a message box. If this call came from the user interface, the message box will be able to show on the page that made the request. And that overall, I mean, that's pretty much the same process that you're looking at. There's not too much different there. So let's run this. All right, mail is sent. We should still have this up here. So now I've got the second email from the web app that came through. Now I'm going to leave this web app running, as if I go back to the project, you'll notice there was one other method on here. There's the handle special URL method. And this is essentially enabling or turning this web app into also a web service. So that by calling the the web service by providing the mail path and then sending along the email subject and message as part of the post request. That can all be extracted. And then we can call the same send mail method that we just called in our test. And of course, we won't provide a session. It doesn't really need one. And this can be used to send an email from something else. So in this case, it can be used to send an email from an iOS app. So here I have an iOS app. Again, with the same structure, a to, a subject, and some text. And here there's a mail socket, and this is actually used to send the request up to the web service. And the code here in the send button essentially creates some JSON base, takes the text fields and puts them in a dictionary, converts that into JSON, and then converts that into data that can be set in the content for the post request. And you can see here that final request is sent as a post request, and it's sent to the URL of the running web app here on my machine. And it's calling the web service path. Since I use handle special URL, always include the API prefix, and then mail is the specific thing I'm checking for here. There it is. And we can see now we also got third email that was sent from the iOS app to the web service and then to my mail account here on the phone. All right, so that is email in a nutshell. And of course, take a look at the email message class. There are other properties and things you can do. You can add attachments, probably the next thing that might be useful. So if you were implementing something that, if your app has some sort of error condition, maybe you want to send out an email to the administrator and attach an error log or something like that. So that's a common and very useful way to take advantage of the SMTP socket. All right, I'd like to remind people to make sure you head to Xojo.com and download the latest version, test it out with your projects, check out the new features and fixes. And definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/GoXojo. When you subscribe, you get notifications for when new videos are posted, including recordings of these live videos. If you're new to Xojo or new to programming, check out xojo.com/learn to grab our free Introduction to Programming book. And of course, always, every day, hang out at the forum.xojo.com. Great place to chat, find answers to questions, ask questions, or even, if you're so inclined, help out by answering other people's questions. And the Xojo Dev Center has full documentation, developer.xojo.com, and the user guide has a section on email. Questions, thoughts, you can always reach me, paul@xojo.com, as I used repeatedly in these email examples. My emails do, or your emails do reach me. And of course, I am also on Twitter, @Lefevre, and the Xojo Twitter account is just @Xojo. I want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.